Welcome back to the Politics and Media programme. The government is just concluding its consultation over the future of legal aid. David Cameron looks set to push through cuts of over 20% in the criminal legal aid budget. Under the new plans, legal aid will be means tested, defendants will no longer have a choice of solicitor, and prisoners who complain about their treatment will be stripped of their legal aid entitlement. So are we now facing a future where there will be one law for the rich and no law for the poor? Let's catch up with this report.
A slew of prominent legal experts have rounded on Justice Secretary Chris Grayling for his plans to reform legal aid. Grayling is attempting to shave some £220 million from the £2 billion legal aid budget through a range of controversial measures, but has received some strong criticism from, amongst others, Lord Neuberger, President of the Supreme Court of England and Wales, who said such moves will lead to people taking the law into their own hands. Proposed measures would mean law firms having to compete with one another through a costly tendering system in order to be able to represent defendants in police stations and magistrates' courts. This, some say, will cripple smaller high street firms who are unable to match the financial clout of the larger established law firms. It is also proposed that legal aid only be made available to British residents and for those earning less than £37,500. There are some concerns that miscarriages of justice could take place. For instance, abandoned migrants and trafficked children without British residency will be left without basic legal protection and liable to deportation and even abuse. The Labour Party, too, have voiced their concerns. The Right Honourable Sadiq Khan, Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, had this to say.
Rather than clients who are presumed innocent having the choice of a solicitor they want, being able to see a solicitor from a small firm on their street who can speak their language or understand the complexity, they will have a solicitor imposed upon them, often working for a big global company, and they'll have no say about the quality of their lawyer.
However, Chris Grayling has hit back at these fears. He said, "We have one of the most expensive legal aid systems in the world, with about £1 billion a year spent just on criminal legal aid. These changes are about getting the best value for the taxpayer and will not in any way affect someone's right to a fair trial." Though many in the legal profession seem adamant not to let these reforms go through, they may need to do more to convince the country at large. Popular prejudice against fat cat lawyers may yet tilt the balance in the government's favour. Amanda Thomas-Johnson, The Islam Channel.
With me in the studio are Omar Farouk, a barrister at Strand Chambers, and Bill Bowring, Professor of Law at Birkbeck College, University of London. And we're also joined on the phone by Mark George, QC, a member of the Save UK Justice campaign. Welcome to the programme, everybody. So, Omar, what will the impact of these proposals be if they're pushed through?
Well, the reading is on the line, and what I'm hearing from my clients and other friends who are involved in the legal services, especially in solicitors and so forth, is many people may go unrepresented, and many people who would have gone to a lawyer or a solicitor or a barrister, they will not be able to afford to get representation. There are certain areas within the immigration, and I think Bill will talk about immigration more, which is his area, but in the family law context, for example, people where they would get legal aid for some of the family work, they're not going to get that anymore. So there will be many people who will probably have to be forced to represent themselves, which actually I think means that the court system will get clogged up with people doing litigation in person, and I don't think it's going to actually help the system and bring about some of the savings that some people think that it's going to achieve.
Bill, so what do you think are going to be the kind of the most serious of the sort of inroads into the way in which the law is currently provided for people with a low income?
Well, I think it's an access to justice issue. And the fact is that the government has to provide representation for everybody in the criminal courts, but the proposal is what's called price competitive tendering. And I very rarely recommend the Mail on Sunday, but they had a tremendous piece last Sunday about Eddie Stobart, a character with a record that you can read about in the article, who is set to take over criminal justice And the fact is that if you're arrested, the police will say to you, not have you got a solicitor to
Hang
go
on,
to.
I've just got to clear this up because before we go any further, this is Eddie Stobart, whose large trucks go up
Exactly,
and down the road.
yes. So he wants to bid for the legal aid for the criminal legal aid franchise.
So as a man who's very good at running trucks, he's going to be taking over.
And he has a certain record with the law, which you can read about in the article. And the thing is that the police will say to you, not have you got a lawyer you would like to come here, or something like that. They will say, here is your Eddie Stobart lawyer, or as it may be, your Tesco lawyer, and you won't have any choice in the matter. One thing you can guarantee is that this lawyer will be, I mean, criminal legal aid lawyers are not well paid at the moment. This lawyer who comes to see you will be very badly paid. And they have this problem in the States where they have public defenders, where you have no choice. That at least has a better structure than we will have in this country. And it means basically that we will have many miscarriages of justice. And that's what the judges themselves are now saying loud and clear. So the judges, even Lord Mackay of Clashfern, who was Mrs. Thatcher's Lord Chancellor, is saying this is no good.
Just to add on to that, John, what I would say is that people, let's say the scenario Bill gave in terms of someone being arrested, you'll have two types of defendants. One who is arrested and has to go with, as Bill put it, a Tesco lawyer, and another defendant who is arrested but has the means or has friends who have the means to pay privately for his or her defense. And so the outcome in terms of justice for somebody who doesn't have rich friends or family or their own money at their disposal, the outcome, I think, on for those two individuals will be different. And what we need to sort of preserve is that justice is being done, it's being seen to be done, and the outcome is fair and just for everybody across the board, regardless of what their means are.
I mean, Mark, just let me bring you into the conversation here, because, I mean, this sounds like an absolutely fundamental rewriting of the access of people without money to the law, but it also has huge implications for lawyers themselves. And there's been some very big protests, perhaps uncharacteristic protests among lawyers about this, hasn't there?
Yes, indeed. I mean, lawyers generally, and barristers in particular, are not known for their militancy. But there have been some big meetings, including in Manchester, where my chambers are, but also there was a huge meeting on the 22nd of May in central London, attended by about 1,000 solicitors and barristers. And universally, the opinion of that meeting was that these proposals are simply a disaster for our clients. And, I mean, let's be frank about it, for the lawyers as well. One of the proposals that the government scheme involves is to reduce the number of what they call providers, let's call them firms of solicitors, from 1,600 across the country down to 400. So 75% of the firms that there are on the high streets that members of the public can drop into any day of the week or can request if they are in a police station will be wiped out. Along, as Bill was saying, with the concept of client choice, which is fundamental in a system such as we have, and frankly, quite extraordinary for a government whose mantra seems to be choice, choice, choice in education, in health provision, you name it. Suddenly, when it comes to the provision of legal services, they don't want to give you any choice at all. That seems very unconservative.
I mean, Omar, what do you think the situation is going to be with some? I'm looking at now at some of the detail of what seems to be going through. I mean, we've talked about the sort of headline denial of the quality of justice that we've had to the poor. But what about this provision that if prisoners complain about their treatment, that the legal aid will be withdrawn? I mean, that seems to be an extraordinary, in its own, it seems to be an extraordinary measure. It is, and it's unfortunate. I think one of the things that we pride ourselves in this country, and I advise on commercial law. Our system is seen as a robust, fair, just system, that people across the world, when they're writing commercial contracts, they will actually choose England and our courts as the forum where the disputes should take place, where resolution should take place. And withdrawal of legal aid for somebody because they are complaining just
doesn't sound right. Yes, there are some people who abuse the system. People abuse systems, and no system is perfect. But to bring forth something that is quite stark in terms of someone's fundamental human rights just doesn't sound right to me.
And what about this provision, Bill? I mean, it seems an extraordinary thing to even suggest that, you know, that if you feel that you've been mistreated in prison, you complain about it, that the legal aid's withdrawn. I mean,
can I say that there is more to this than first meets the eye?
Well, go on, tell us.
As a matter of fact, prisoners in this country had no rights whatsoever once they went into prison. They just disappeared from society until we lost a number of cases at the European Court of Human Rights. And this was fairly early on. By the way, the European Convention on Human Rights, written by conservative lawyers, as a matter of fact. So since the 1970s, prisoners have had certain rights that they never had before. But of course, exercising those rights depends on being represented. And I know quite a number of people who represent prisoners. None of them are fat cats, by the way. They earn not very much at all. And how much a legal aid lawyer earns is, to begin with, about $15,000 a year, and an experienced lawyer, £30,000 a year. It's that kind of, you know, so we're not talking about huge sums at all. And the rest of social welfare law, by the way, so I know a lot of people who are in small high street firms who represent poor people across a great spectrum of issues that affect people. They will no longer be able to provide those services to people who can't afford it. So, as we've said, as Mark said, the number of firms which are going to disappear is absolutely shocking. The bar will be decimated as well. I mean, this is why you saw barristers in wigs and gowns demonstrating outside Parliament just recently, a sight which has not been seen for really a very long time.
Just to add on to that, also, and it prompted me from what Bill was saying, there are people, for example, who are applying for benefits, and this area of the law is, one would say, the non-glamorous area of the law. So people who've been refused benefits by the Department of Work and Pensions, and those people who are poor, who are represented and appealing such decisions, and the decisions by the department haven't been great, and that's why there've been so many appeals. I'm concerned people like that will be affected phenomenally, given that the new regime is coming in terms of how much benefits one can get, how much they can claim, and so forth. So it's a travesty, unfortunately.
Mark, how much do you think this is now beginning to impact on the media? Because it's not the most obvious case of cuts that you hear about. That would be the NHS or education or something like this. But it seems to be an attack which is as serious in terms of what it will do to the kind of established social fabric.
Well, if, like me, you regard the legal aid system as a part of the welfare state, then what is happening in legal aid, both criminal and civil, is part of a concerted ideological attack upon the welfare state. This particular part of it, which is a tiny proportion of the overall spend, I suppose benefits from the fact that there are a lot of very articulate people involved in it. And we have, to that extent, been able to make a fairly good case for why we say this whole proposal from the government is so flawed. The difficulty that we have had is, yes, there has been, generally speaking, quite favourable coverage in the newspapers. I say generally because every now and then it's apparent that the MOJ slip a story to one of their favourite newspapers reminding an editor to emphasise the fat cat tag, when in actual fact, if you read the government's own document, in relation to criminal legal aid, the government's own document acknowledges that 2/3 of all barristers doing criminal legal aid work earn less than about £42,000 a year once you've taken off the VAT, which is not theirs as part of their income. So they acknowledge that there are many, many barristers earning very modest salaries, not fat cats at all. But the public perception still remains that the legal profession are, as a whole, fat cats, and that it's not easy for members of the public to distinguish between a commercial lawyer who perhaps is earning vast sums of money. And
let me bring Omar in a moment on that. Yeah, go on.
I absolutely agree with Mark on the point that this whole a very serious debate, rather than being discussed in a wise manner, people are slipping stories of fat cat lawyers. And I want to say on television that actually when I go and, let's say, prosecute for a day in a magistrate's court, do you know, John, I will get paid probably less than £200, and you'll be working from about 9 o'clock in the morning, and the other day I was there until 6 o'clock. That whole day, and you're getting less than £200. The reason one does it, and many of us who are lawyers, is because we want justice and we want to see fairness. And unfortunately, Mark is absolutely right when he says that the way this issue is dealt with, to clobber lawyers and our clients actually over their head, is to have this fat cat lawyer story, which a very few of us maybe are on, and the whole legal profession and our clients are tarnished by that, and that is very unfair, I think.
I mean, it's an old story, though, isn't it, Bill? I mean, when it comes to the the cuts in welfare, it's that there's scroungers, and they're supposed to be typical in the way that fat cat lawyers are supposed to be typical for the government here. There's illegal immigrants. I mean, this is an old divide and rule story by the government, isn't it?
I think the government has actually, as Mark was just saying, taken on a rather articulate body of people who are actually not badly organised. I mean, the barristers and the solicitors each have their trade unions, which have really jumped on this issue. So let's see, I mean, who's going to win Can I just make one other point?
Yeah, go on.
Why the judges also have come out so strongly in this is that there are a lot of people who have to go to court. They have no choice. And if they can't get representation, they have to represent themselves. Now, they will spend some time in the public library and they'll probably learn as much as they can before they go to court. But then the judge has got the awful task of trying to produce fairness in court, trying to do what he or she can for the litigants in front of them. One side is represented by a QC, the other side is trying to represent themselves. And this is where the whole system of justice is in danger of breaking down. That's what the judges are saying.
I know one was suggesting that really what will happen is that there will be, in that scenario, that there will be miscarriages of justice, that in fact it'll end up like being some of the so-called reforms in the NHS, that it will actually increase the bureaucracy and increase the cost, so it won't even work in its own terms, is that?
You see, in this country, we seem to be hell-bent at the moment on introducing here models which have failed in the United States of America. And one reason why people sit in death row for many, many, many years in the United States is because they are very badly represented in their trial, extremely badly represented by a Tesco lawyer. Then there have to be endless appeals afterwards. And I'm afraid to say that is where we will find ourselves if these changes become law.
I mean, Omar, you started off in the East End of London. What do you think it's going to mean? I mean, we've got a picture that Mark has given us of many of the local law firms in the streets of those parts of town disappearing. You've said that many people who are on benefits will be damaged by this. So, I mean, the government is giving a picture of this as only 200 people will be affected, but that's not your picture.
John, sort of to depersonalize, let's say, the political colour of any government, every single government, having been in the government legal services myself for a good 10, 12 years, every single government is there trying to cut down sort of costs and trying to sell something. And given that we have austerity now and cuts and so forth, if one looks at legal reform through the last couple of decades, Mark is absolutely right when he says, if you look at 1,600 service providers currently, we're going to cut it down to 400. That affects not just the people who are the 1,200 going to be cut down, as well as their clients. So if you are looking at the NHS, what it means, if you have 400 lawyers, it means access, as Phil was saying, access to justice becomes restricted. So there is less choice. But forget the choice. It's in whether you will have a choice in certain areas becomes a question. So I think across the board, especially with respect to high street firms, they will disappear. And the question then comes is, when somebody has a problem, who do they go to? Will there be help? And it could become something akin to people having post offices, whether they're going to be there or not. An essential service not being where it's needed, it's not being provided, and people not having an opportunity to access the essential service in some cases.
And so, Bill, When we're talking about local firms disappearing like this, obviously the legal aid services won't be available, but presumably lots of other things to do with, getting the freehold on your house or whatnot won't be available either from those firms.
Well, there's as you maybe have seen, there are many advertisements these days for cut price services for selling your house or making a will. Whether you will get a good job, of course, with those, that's another question. There's a further point, though, which is it might be said, why can't you go to the Citizens Advice Bureau or the Law Centre locally? Those are being cut to shreds as we speak because they're by and large local authority funded. Local authorities have got no money. So the services that used to be, and by the way, I've been a practicing barrister myself since 1975, and I started off in the Brixton Advice Centre, which still exists, but it's the only one still existing out of several that used to exist. And the fact of the matter is, they themselves are under threat. So people will have literally nowhere to go.
And just a second, I just want to bring Mark back in for a last word because we're coming towards the end of the programme. Mark, how much time has the legal profession and those concerned with this issue, how much time is there now left to save the legal aid in this form that it exists?
Well, the consultation process period has just concluded last Tuesday. So we are now in a period when the government are allegedly going to consider the responses they've had, which seem to have been universally hostile from everybody, from barristers and solicitors through judges, all manner of organisations. And the next stage is the government either turn around and say, actually, we need to do some more work on this, we're not going to go ahead, or they say, right, okay, full steam ahead. Now we want people to bid for these contracts.
OK, Mark, I'm going to have to cut you off there because that's all we've got time for. But we will be following the fate of the legal aid system in this country in future editions of the Politics and Media programme.